Hey there. Normally, when we talk about negotiations, we like to use the term win-win negotiations, and it seems like win-win is the holy grail. It's the ultimate, the best, optimal outcome that one can get out of a negotiated result. Now, before we get into win-win, let's think about what exactly is win-win and how many negotiations, how many of those negotiations out there actually ended up with a win-win result. Now, let's use a very common scenario. Let's say the seller sells at $100 and the buyer says, nah, 100 is too expensive, I'm going to have 80. Now, and then eventually we meet somewhere in the middle. So the seller and buyer agree that, well, let's do 90. Now, that is not win-win. That is a compromise. A compromise meaning that the seller wants to sell 100, but is willing to kind of give and take a bit and then take a step back and say, let's do it at 90. The buyer wanted to aim for 80 and say that, well, maybe I'm asking too low a price and I may end up with nothing. So why don't I just add a bit and then I agree at 90. So that's a compromise, and that's a very common result, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that it's not exactly win-win. So what is win-win? Win-win is that, in the same example, the seller sells at 100 and the buyer says, nah, I want 80. And the seller asks the buyer and say that, 100 unfortunately is my lowest price. Now, besides price, what else is important for you? Right? What else are some of the things that are important for you in this purchase, in this product, in this solution that will give you a better result, give you a better life, and so on. So, and let's assuming we've got a very nice buyer, and the buyer says, I'm thinking that maybe I like to have better after-sales service, I like to have more technical support, I like to have some sort of a complete solution, and so on. And the seller says, well, if that's the case, with this $100, you can have more of what you like to achieve. I can give you some assurances and some services that delivers a better outcome for you. And the buyer says, great. So in this scenario, what happens is that the buyer, is optimizing all the outcomes that the buyer wanted to have, and the seller does not have to reduce price just to get the deal. So when both parties are able to optimize the outcomes that they want to achieve, then that is what we call win-win. Okay, so that's the difference between win-win and a compromise. Now, the thing about win-win is it does not apply to all negotiations, because you may want to have a win-win result, but if the other party does not really care about you, if the other party is just concerned about what he or she gets for himself or herself only, and especially at the expense of what you are going to get, you are not going to get win-win. But that person is aiming for a win-lose result, and the only way, probably the only way to work around that is to force for a compromise. You push back and make sure that you don't lose your pants, so to speak. You don't get squeezed out by this other person, by your adversary, and the other person realizes that now if they are going to push you too much, maybe they'll end up with nothing. So they're forced to get to a compromise. So that's the case. You win-win. Well, it's great, but it doesn't mean that you will always achieve win-win, especially when the other party is not going to play win-win with you. Well, of course, you can actually you can try to find out ways on how to convince the other person, persuade the other person, ask a few questions, clarify the needs, clarify what outcomes they want to have, and see if the other person is willing to explore better solutions. Now, on the other hand, though, if the other person is coming to you very strongly, how much of a persuasion are you able to get? That's a question mark. If you're able to persuade that person to change from a win-lose mindset to the win-win mindset, congratulations, that's great. If not, maybe forcing a compromise may be a good solution after all. Now, on the other hand, compromise, well, it's a workable result, but sometimes, and compromise, by the way, it's also a very quick result. You take one step back, I take one step back, we get a deal. right? It's a very quick result. We can end up in a compromise solution in negotiations very quickly. The downside to that is we end up with a solution too quickly, to the extent that if we spend a little bit more time exploring possible solutions, we might have a win-win solution if we are willing to explore and talk and discuss and spend more time. And sometimes we are just focused on getting a result, whatever result, and we end up with a compromise. And maybe we could, especially if the other party, the other person is willing to talk, willing to discuss, we could talk a bit more and go for a win-win. Okay, so that's something to think about. Just to recap, win-win is great, but most of the time, all we get is a compromise solution, right? And win-win is great, but you can't have win-win if the other party does not want to play win-win with you. Most of the time, we end up with a compromise, and the issue with the compromise is, while it's good, we might actually end up with a compromise too quick, too soon, and leave things on the table by not exploring for something that could be win-win and optimized for both parties or all parties, right? That's all those few minutes with you on win-win sales negotiations. Talk to you soon.